Okay, for people who are joining this live stream, this is our weekly meeting about language completeness and consistency. And we haven't been having too many of these live streams, as I've mentioned in some previous ones, partly because we're in the finishing process for version 12.1, and partly because I am working very intensely on my physics project, which hopefully will be ready to live stream and tell people about quite soon, a few weeks. All right, let's get into this one. Okay, so first of all, we're talking about Iconize. Iconize output for the size limiter. Oh, that's cool. All right.
So it's in the prototype build.
I hope I have the prototype build. Why don't I have an icon for the prototype build? 6700138, or, well, I'll try this one, 67.
Yeah, that should definitely be recent enough.
Okay, can somebody flag the fact that I don't have my usual icon for desktop for the prototype build? Let Roger know.
Yeah, I can let him know.
Right, so this is sort of really just a rough prototype and just wanted to, sort of solicit feedback. And, Billy from design is here, so we can talk about anything that...
Let's go bigger. Okay. What am I looking for?
Right, so under store, there's
I think we already lost the game. We've got tons of screen real estate here. We really need yeah, I don't see why we shouldn't just, show what we want to show here rather than hiding it under these rather obscure categories.
Right, well, I think the show one makes sense, right? Because it's right, that's the old menu that lets you show more, less, all,
I don't know why that isn't. Okay. Let's talk about this for a second. Okay. Show less is fine, but not relevant until you are showing more.
Correct.
Right? Okay. I mean, I really don't like this, the current. Okay, so first of all, the fact that it says large output, you don't say. I mean,
yeah, what does it say in master? Is that something
it has
new?
always said large output. It has always been the label.
Okay, I guess
to let you know that you're not seeing the whole thing.
Right. So I guess it's been so long we've just sort of tuned that out of our heads until now, where we're taking a fresh look at it.
Right. So to me, the explicitness of these buttons I really like. I don't particularly like the buttons, but I mean, the settings, I agree we could hide that, although it seems rather silly to have a pull down that has one thing underneath it.
I agree.
Although we could imagine an auto-iconize setting. I don't know whether we want that setting. I mean, okay. Okay. Let's see what this actually does. Okay, so store as iconized. That behavior is just bizarre to me. I mean, what do you mean store? I mean, as in, okay, so hold on. Why can't I say show iconized? I'm totally confuzzled here.
Because what's in the notebook now is not the complete expression. What's in there is a reference to out and, a partial, right? The whole point of this thing is that we are not typesetting the entire expression.
Okay, so other things that have a store in notebook, like data set and so on, how does that work? Or like audio, if I say, audio capture. Okay. Hello there. Okay, why doesn't that have a store?
Because I don't know, but right.
Okay, so
yeah, I think that's a different. I mean, you want to look at things like data set and sparse array, right? So if you did sparse array of that range.
Okay, this motif is what we have to use here. If this is our motif, this is what we have to use here.
I'm not completely sure I understand what you mean by.
Look, what I'm saying is, this is a completely different kind of way of showing stuff. Okay, so first of all, look, to me, the options are convert to iconized form. Look, what I think we should say is store in notebook. You know, as icon. In current form. I don't like those words, but you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. So are we talking about a drop down or
no drop downs? No drop downs.
Okay, so we have a label that's not a clickable button, which is store in notebook, and then we have two buttons that are clickable.
Possibly, but I don't really like that. I would prefer everything to see. I think this data not in notebook store now is a useful sentiment, except most of the time this is pure output. I'm beginning to think that what we should do is say convert to iconized, convert to iconized, convert to icon, iconized, convert to iconized form. And then we could say data not in notebook store now. Same thing.
Well, except the convert to iconized form is missing the fact that it's also doing the store now.
I'm going to assume that people implicitly realize that. I think because they don't even know. I didn't even know. It takes me real thought to realize that this isn't in the note. Okay, hold on. What other things do we need to do? So first of all, there's show more, show all.
And at times a show less.
At times show less, right?
Right. I mean,
wait just a second. So, store full expression in notebook.
I was actually going to suggest the opposite, that we sort of reverse the order of the data not a notebook store now, have that first, and then store as iconized or store in iconized form.
I don't like that because I think this is much the most useful thing. I don't know when I would ever use this.
Sorry, I think we are mixing two things here. One is the storage, the other one is the copying. So imagine, and I hadn't realized before either that this was not storing the information in the notebook. So imagine,
Jose, the fact that you and I both, as long-time users of the system, barely knew that is a sign that it just doesn't matter.
Yes, but
now I realize, get a bug report about it, which we have.
Now I realize that the useful thing would be if in a notebook I click store in the notebook, and then later in a different session, I can come back here and say, copy this as an iconize and put it somewhere else. Because I like the fact that I'm seeing what is there. It's just that in the next section, in the next session, I want to copy it back.
It is certainly the case that, the principal problem here is that we're trying to do a, sort of a two-step thing, showing it in one step. I mean, one could imagine, whether or not you like it is another story, but one could imagine that you simply have no option to go straight to iconized form unless the data are in the notebook.
Yeah.
So once you store the data, then an iconized thing shows up.
No, I hate that.
Right.
But you're right. There are two
right,
different actions. There's convert to iconized form here, and copy as iconized form, but leave this.
And there's a third right. I mean, Jose pointed out that there's another state people might want, which is store the data but leave it displayed like that, so you see the you have
exactly.
more.
That's what I'm saying. So yes, store full expression in notebook, leaves it like this, just stores it in the background.
So let me just say that I find it a bit curious that we're kind of taking this whole attitude toward this interface. The interface was originally conceived as basically a way of saying, well, you probably did something you didn't intend to do, and here's a low consequence way of visualizing what you probably didn't intend to do. Whereas, of course, if you did intend to do it, you could have simply added / iconize.
Yes, but you don't think of that. And also, sometimes you want to see the. No, I disagree with many premises of your claim here. Okay, I do this because I actually want to see roughly what's coming out. Right. I want to get some idea of what came out.
That wasn't the original purpose of this interface. So, you're co-opting it for another purpose.
I understand that, but we build things and then think of how it works in biological evolution. It builds something and then it gets co-opted for all kinds of weird purposes. Same thing here, right? This is useful.
Well, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because all of its current design came from a particular point of view.
I understand.
If you want another point of view, maybe we should.
We've changed the point of view.
Maybe we need to change some of our assumptions.
Right. We've changed the point of view. So let's just take this from the top. Okay. The idea that you have a panel that represents this big output, just fine as far as I'm concerned. Okay. I don't have a problem with that. Personally, graphically, I think having this be a more obvious border at the bottom would be nice, more like this kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Where it's kind of an attached buttony thing, where there's the panel here, and then there's an attached button thing underneath. Billy, if I'm making sense there.
Yep.
And the capitalization and so on. I mean, this is okay. So what I think, I mean, first of all, there's show more. Clearly, we need that. Show all, we clearly need that. Now, if we know how big it is, do we have any idea how big it is, or do we not have any serious idea how big it is?
Well, we certainly have the byte count, right?
Yes.
Yeah, understanding. I mean, we don't have its full typeset representation, and so there's a certain amount of knowledge that we're lacking there. And the reason we don't is because that's part of the cost that we're trying to save is the generation of that expression.
Okay, but we know it's byte count. We know it's underlying byte count, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it will be useful to give that. I mean, it doesn't tell you how big it is when it's formatted, but I mean, it gives some sense. If it's, if that number was a gigabyte, I would not press show all.
Right.
I think that information is in the sparse array case in a tooltip. If you want to see what we've done for that. There you go.
Okay. Fine. What do we say in the right-click menu for the I think we could get away with just saying iconize. Particularly if we put an icon of the iconized thing there. That's what I'm proposing. And then the settings could say, always store full expression in notebook.
Oh, I don't think you actually want that. That is
live
a
stream is asking for that, but
yeah, but even if they're asking for it, I don't think they actually mean it, because that is a great recipe for crashing your front end.
So we have 2 gigabyte practical file limit. Its size. It's the front end's not going to behave well with files larger than 2 gigabytes.
Right. And for example, the Store Now button and sparse array goes away above a certain limit precisely to prevent the front end from crashing when you click on.
Well, then let's do this. Look, set size limit is one thing, and then always store full expression up to a certain size.
Mm-hmm. And it's right, and that, well, I guess if you're just storing the expression, it's probably not super expensive. It's just big. I mean, super
set
expensive.
Size limit for display. And then we say something like that. And let's just understand what it will do. So Iconize does what you have it doing right now. That is, it just turns into an icon. Let's look at the icon it turns into. Oops. Okay, so it's just the generic icon for that thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Copy as iconized. That would actually do the copy right there and put it on the clipboard, right?
Presumably.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure. I mean, if we're going to have separate copy as iconize and store and insert in notebook, I'm not sure that the wording should be different from what we use elsewhere.
For what?
For instead of store full expression in notebook, why isn't it data not in notebook?
Let me tell you why. Because I think some of these things will not be quotes data at all. So I'm saying I think that's confusing. If it's a sparse array, I have no trouble with data not in notebook. But if what came out was a giant, who knows what, War and Peace or something, well, maybe that's data too. I don't know.
Or, I mean, you did a notebook read and you had guts.
What? Oh, and you got the guts of the notebook.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just don't think data is the right. I'm liking this collection here. And
Are we always going to have that much room for all the text?
Well, it'll be the width of the notebook, right? So if you have a very narrow notebook.
I have fixed bugs that you, I think, reported, Stephen, when viewing this on a phone, to make these buttons look better on a very narrow.
So they'll have to stack.
They'll have to accommodate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Ethan on our live stream is saying, when there are lots of large outputs, it will be nice to have an iconize all output. Actually, what that suggests is an interesting idea. I mean, if it is the case, if we believe that slow scrolling and things is sort of here to stay, which I'm not sure it really is, but if it is, a thing which says thumbnail my outputs, or bitmap my outputs, but leave the data in there. Is that a thing, John, or does that not make any sense?
Well, I mean, it depends on why things are slow. If things are slow because it's loading data from disk, then it's having the data in the notebook. It's still going to be loaded from disk. If in that case the cost was just the amount of time it took to parse stuff from disk, there are other forms of costs when you're loading. It might be, formatting the boxes, line breaking, or something like that. No. When you say scrolling, I'm being very precise. Why is it slow when you're scrolling? It's slow because it's not ready to draw on screen, and the cases that you often see and I hear about are typically because it's not even loaded from disk yet.
Fair enough. When have we got? I mean, this has come up before, the concept of a binary notebook format, some kind of WXF-based thing. Does that make any sense, or is that just a stupid idea?
It would be only a small win. And a lot of places where we get some kind of win, we're already getting it in compressed data. There is significant overhead to pulling down, let's say a large block of numeric data, and we get the win because we're already doing that in compressed data.
Fair enough.
So we can get a little more by going from text to binary, but it's not enough to make it worth it.
I wonder if we should iconize the button currently labeled Iconize should say Iconize complete expression, just to sort of make it clear you're getting however many megabytes from the left hand side stuck in your notebook.
Well, do you have to say complete? Is just Iconize expression communicate the same thing?
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, that size information could also be in the first element, large output, parentheses, 1 gigabyte.
Well, we're dropping the words large output.
Okay. But one thing I wondered, these last two checkboxes, set size limit. If I set the size limit to 1 gigabyte, doesn't it then automatically store the full expression for anything less than 1 gigabyte?
Yes.
Because it doesn't even bring up this stuff, and so you don't actually need that setting.
What do you mean?
Well, if I set the size limit to 1 gigabyte, and if the output is less than 1 gigabyte, it doesn't even bring up that short form, so there's no need for that second checkbox, because it always stores the full expression up to the size limit.
No, but that's setting a different size limit. That's setting the limit where there's a level at which this display will come up, right? Because I could set 100,000 elements. I could go and show them all on my screen, right?
Yes.
But in this case, what I might want to do is store those in the notebook, but don't show them on the screen.
So that's a different size limit. Okay.
Right. Okay, let me just talk about the 34 megabytes thing, because it really applies to everything here. Maybe we should just put it at the beginning with some graphic design device. Look, really what this is expression size. Because we don't actually know what the...
Right, and let me point out, right, if you set, dollar notebook inline storage limit to some large value, then this output size limiter would not come up because it would have some sense of the, the size, right? There's some guesstimation of what the sort of box size will be, and it knows that this has a pretty compact boxes.
For example, if it hits a a graphics box or a graphics 3D box, it's going to say, "Wow, that just basically looks like one leaf," regardless of what's inside of it.
Right. Okay. So, Moofy on our live stream is commenting about iOS as a pattern just-in-time lazy loading for UI scroll view elements. I think we're doing that kind of thing and have been for like 30 years. I think, unless I'm mistaking something. Yeah, I think we don't load until we need to. Okay, so I propose this. Billy, can you try and get a design? On the app, it should presumably just stack. I mean, when there isn't enough space, just stack them responsively, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Should you think settings should be global? They could conceivably be notebook specific as well.
Okay, I mean that would be nice to do if it's easy for us to do it. Why not have a little, notebook? This notebook only. This session only, and always. And then those things need to go into the global preferences.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, I probably should store this someplace.
Right, we'll need some sort of apply button, right, so that it knows to...
Where on earth do I put this? Anybody? Devin, do you have any idea where this goes?
I couldn't think of an obvious location.
Ugh.
That looks good to me.
Okay, we're ready to go on to the next topic.
Sure.
Okay, another John topic. John needs to be working on finishing 12.
No, that's okay. I'm completely unprepared for this meeting. So, aren't you happy?
Okay.
Right. So, so Roman makes some claims about facilities which I don't know exist, so maybe he should explain a bit more precisely. But the basic question is, when do we want to spin up kernels for parallel?
I have a more basic question. Okay, so when I do parallel evaluate of something like $machine name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, by the way, I really hope that this is going to get modernized soon. Roman, that is on the list, right, to modernize that.
Yes, I mean there's apparently a general project of modernizing.
Yes, but are you in communication with the people who are dealing with that?
Not at the moment, because we're still working on 12.1, and this is clearly not for 12.1.
Okay, all right. So I now have 100 kernels spun up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, if I'm doing a particular computation, so I would like to partition this. So I would like to run only on some of these kernels. I'd like to run, I've got two big computations going on. Maybe I've got two different master kernels for those different computations. Okay, how do I do that?
Well, I mean, if you have different master kernels, then you should have two notebooks, each with a different kernel, and each of those kernels will launch.
Okay, how do I tell it what to launch? It's launched from the preferences, and I don't want, and the preferences.
Yes, then I mean, you can set up your own lists of kernels to launch.
How?
You are not just assigned to a variable of your choice, and so I say kernel set 1 equals, and then a list of those kernels, and kernel set 2 equals whatever else, and you just give that. The argument to launch kernels is a list of kernel specifications to launch, and the default is $default kernels or so. But you can just use any list you assign.
How do I know what they're called? Before they're launched, how do I know what they're called?
No, I mean, look at look at your dollar default $configured kernels. I think it is. Yes.
Okay, this documentation is totally inadequate. It doesn't give any example of that. Come on.
Yes, I mean,
Well,
what
that's
is,
the basic examples. Maybe you need to look at scope.
yeah, no, I mean, what's missing here is that the different launchers, like local kernels, remote kernels, lightweight grid kernels, and so on, are not documented here because they are not in the system context. And that's why this documentation is rather vague about how to specify kernels, except for the obvious case.
Well, but here, you know, dollar configured kernels could absolutely be talked about here, right? You could say that. I mean, so for example, and
Yeah,
certainly
it
it should be in
should.
basic examples,
Should.
because how can you say launch kernels? This just shows launch kernels open bracket, right? Yeah,
Yes,
you
no,
should put that in the basic examples.
yeah, I mean, certainly the details should talk about dollar configured kernels here. I mean,
But even if I
it's
close the
encoded.
kernels, okay. So by the way, and also this should turn into nice icons here, right? For dollar configured kernels. If I close kernels, right, and then I say dollar configured kernels, okay, I don't understand this result at all. I don't understand what I'm seeing here. I don't understand what those things are. What are those things?
I mean, if you look at the input form, you can kind of see what it's doing.
Well, but that thing, whatever that representation is, it should be.
Okay, no, that's not very. No, I mean that's how they look, but yes, I mean the documentation about the various kernel launchers is missing here. I mean that's in a very obscure place in the package documentation.
Okay, but to me, this story, I mean, to me, you should be able to say launch kernels and then like the name of a machine, for example, here. Right?
And
yes, I mean,
sorry to interrupt, but Roman, didn't we update it so that the head of these things really is kernel object?
That's for the kernels themselves. That's for the result of launching. You see the
What
ones
are
you
these
see at
things?
bottom.
What are these things? These are some kind of.
This is a configuration language, so it's a symbolic expression with head remote machine, and the first argument is the name of the machine. The second argument is.
I think that head /@ is on %11 or no? Oh no, you reevaluated
No,
it.
it's this thing.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, the basic point here is what you need is a symbolic representation of the machine.
Yes, I mean, there is a symbolic representation. It's just not well documented, and you don't see, and it has this crummy abbreviated form you see in the middle of the screen, right?
Okay,
right.
So this is not difficult to. What is there any reason we shouldn't just clean this up a bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is all part of the new remote kernel launcher that I'm working on, and you are right. This should be cleaned up. I mean,
okay, but that's an active project, yes?
Yeah, 12.2 is a big revision of all of this stuff. Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about this. Okay.
So
use parallel kernels.
Right. So okay. So Roman, I guess I should have tested this beforehand, but I didn't. You're claiming that $use parallel kernels is an existing symbol?
No, that's a proposal that
That's a proposal.
Yes.
Okay, so let's take an example of breadth first search.
Right. Well, let me say something before we dive into the minutia. Right. So suppose Simplify wants to automatically spawn off
parallel threads.
Parallel kernels, not parallel threads.
Yeah.
Then I believe the current behavior is if you've already launched some kernels, then some slave kernels, it will use them. But if you haven't, it won't. And so there are sort of two reasons for that. One is, well, maybe you're on a cloud server where there are lots and lots of master servers kernels, and you don't want a bunch of slave kernels running around. And the other is, licensing. I mean, we don't want to be eating up users' kernels without being very clear about how what we're doing.
And there's another reason,
and how they can control it.
as a person who's actually doing stuff that involves, hundreds of kernels and things, right? If I can eat my machine that I'm actually sitting at alive by doing this.
Exactly.
And I don't necessarily want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is that at the moment there is no uniform way these auto-parallelizing functions handle this case. And so that's
What's an example of an auto-parallelizing function?
what is CAD functions. And
does breadth first scan auto-parallelize? I think it does.
No, I doubt it, right? Because the cost of transferring the graph to another kernel would be greater than the benefit. I mean, it might be multi-threaded, but it's something like simplify with certain piecewise expressions. But and there's a system option that controls.
Incidentally, a comment. I have this function parallel map monitored, which should be in the function repository. I'm not sure if it's there yet. It is super nice, and we should do it by default for parallel map. Have you seen it?
I mean, I've seen it. I mean, my proposal was to make the monitor function more useful. At the moment, the monitor function just uses some local variables that may be around, but any functional programming and any
right. Have you figured out how to make monitor work?
Does not. And so the one idea would be to have a one argument function of monitor that just has a bunch of up values. So you could say monitor of parallel map, which would then do something useful. You could do monitor of some PDE.
Wait a minute, there's a curried form.
Which would just monitor of parallel map of whatever, but a single argument form of monitor, which would do something useful with the argument.
Well, I like that idea. Yes, I think that is a good idea.
So if you say monitor of solve PDE, it would automatically do whatever is necessary. You don't have to worry about step monitor and stuff like that.
I think it's a good idea. I mean, and in effect, we're doing that for the machine learning functions that automatically bring up a monitoring panel.
I mean, the main problem is that for parallel functions, there is no way to monitor variables on the remote kernels. That would just kill all performance. But
yeah, I understand.
The scheduler on the master kernel has lots of information about the progress of the computation, and we could simply visualize that. That's probably what your current parallel monitor does. So just give information about the progress of the overall parallelization of the function.
So, I mean, I could imagine a function monitored. I don't know, maybe it's the same thing as monitor. I mean, right now, what monitor does, right? If I say monitor, table, what the heck? Why am I not seeing anything there?
Well, probably because of scoping. I mean, it's really not that useful, right? I mean,
no, that should work.
Yes. Well, use a small example and the pause inside, then you can see what's going on.
And what the heck just happened here? John, this is scaring me.
You're gonna blame me for a hung kernel?
Is it a hung kernel?
That's what it was claiming, and that's what it looked like.
Now it's a dead kernel.
Which apparently restarted.
Okay, so this claims maybe it was changing too fast in the previous example.
I think so. Using pause or something like that works well.
Okay. All right. So this is monitoring with a specific monitor type there.
So I guess we have to keep updating our monitor examples because everything gets too fast.
Indeed. That should actually be noted for the documentation people, that some of these things that involve speed should be changed. Okay.
My claim is that most interesting examples and good code don't have any obvious local variables you could monitor.
I agree. That's what I find all the time. Right. So I agree with you. I think the main issue is how deep does it monitor? So in other words, if I've got a big lump of code, so my claim would be, actually, this is a good way to think about it. Monitor is like echo. That what monitor tries to do is it monitors the outermost function that you wrap it around, which isn't actually like echo. But anyway, never mind that.
Yes, but to be useful, each of these functions needs to decide.
Oh, sure.
And so there should be 100 up values for monitor.
Exactly. But I mean, so this is another possible form, which is probably obscure. Forget that. That's a stupid form. I think the right way to do it is, as you say, a one argument form of monitor, and in which it just does the right thing for its nearest function. Because the fact is, there could be deep functions inside XBAR, right? And you get in a total tangle if you're trying to monitor. If you,
but I mean, you see, you could even overload monitor for semicolons, so it would then show you how it progresses along the list, and it could monitor list itself and show you how it evaluates the arguments.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying, Roman, is that I really like this idea, but monitor should only, one instance of monitor should look only at the thing whose head it is just inside it.
I don't think this should be done via up values, as Roman is suggesting, because I don't think we want to make the monitoring function, slow with, giving it hundreds or thousands of up values.
Right. It can dispatch, the monitor can just dispatch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, so maybe these functions should register a monitor if they have something useful to do.
Sure, that's something that could be done.
I really like this idea. This is a great idea. This fits into the kind of code assistance framework as well. Let's figure out how to get this built.
There's also the progress bars update that's happening. That's very related to this.
Indeed so. Who is PMing that?
That's me.
Okay. What is its status?
Yeah, so we've been meeting bi-weekly. It's under the umbrella of LCC. Julio has created a pretty good looking framework so far, and we're trying to push it for 12.2. I'm sure Ty can speak more to it as well. But yeah,
okay.
Yeah, things are coming along nicely.
All right, so can we review that in one of these meetings, please? And then let's try and let's get a list. Maybe Roman could help and get a list of functions that are early candidates to be monitored by monitor.
Okay.
And then bring that back to this meeting. All right, let's talk about using parallel kernels. Okay, so the main issue is if we have internal code that contains a parallel function, how does it decide whether to run in parallel? And if it does decide to run in parallel, how many? I mean, what we're basically saying here is, in addition to parallel evaluate, which just says anything that's in my launched kernels, go use them, right, Roman?
Yes. I mean,
I can imagine a case where you might want to say, well, give me 3 kernels, throw 3 kernels at this, but don't eat my machine alive for the sake of doing this.
Yes, I mean,
doesn't parallel evaluate launch kernels if there are no launched ones?
Well, if there are no launch kernels, it launches those $configured kernels.
Right.
So it's up to you to decide what to do, and the default is just a bunch of local kernels. So that's very cheap. But
reasonably cheap.
The main.
Look, it's mostly not cheap because it might eat your machine alive.
Right. I mean, if you have 3 different Mathematicas open and each one of them decides to use the maximum number available of subkernels, then.
Well, but I mean, they OSs are quite good at time sharing these days, and.
Really? Yeah. Not what I've noticed. I mean, I have the latest, fanciest Mac here, and with the latest, fanciest operating system, I was somewhat surprised, but the thing, running all these parallel kernels, it succeeded in making it so that I couldn't type, which shouldn't happen. I mean, the scheduler should not allow that to happen.
The subkernels run at a lower priority, so they should.
Well, I can't speak to how Catalina's scheduler works, but
okay, well,
something.
Neither can I. I mean, I don't have that experience, but I use a different operating system.
Of course, right now I'm fighting the fact that the Apple Mail client is using 200% of CPU and taking forever to do things, and it's clear from some debugging that I depressingly, personally ended up doing that it's in the Mail client.
I mean, the main problem
Roman,
is
but also, are you running it on in an X or Wayland desktop, or are you SSHing into some machine? Because the your window manager can become quite bogged down even when you have a bunch of low priority things running.
All right. In any case, the basic point is, if we have the possibility of parallelization in a function, should we use it, and how much of it should we do? That's the basic question.
I mean, the main technical problem is indeed that there is only one set of kernels that is
I understand. And for example, you have this weird subpar message which says, when I try and parallelize something which is already parallelized, it says you can't.
That's a different case. I mean, that's just a kernel that doesn't support parallelism. And clearly, if you do this with a PDE or something, it shouldn't even bother to tell you that. But the main decision to take in one of our functions is whether, if kernels are already running, then use them. It doesn't matter how many there are, right? But if no kernels are running, should you?
I'm sorry, that's not self-evident to me that you should use all of them. I don't think it's clear you should use all of them.
Well, I think that's relatively uncontroversial, because if this is something that's spinning, being auto done by the function you're calling, you're not going to be launching anything in those subkernels until that function returns. And since we're not going to have simplify, return immediately.
You're thinking of the single machine case.
What's that?
You're thinking of the single machine case. Look at my case where I have a whole bunch of different machines, and where a completely different master kernel could be trying to run on one of those machines. But that machine just got eaten alive by the things I'm doing from, kernel A, right? So that means kernel B is dead in the water on that machine.
Well, but then maybe your configuration isn't correct, because then you are over provisioning that machine.
No, because look, well, okay, maybe. I mean, maybe the right answer to this is, okay, so your basic claim is, if the kernels are available, use them.
Yes.
So in my case, you'd use 100 kernels.
Yes. I mean, if the problem is small, it will not use them anyway. And if the problem is big, then you better use them, right? And so I think as Ita said, I think that case is probably not very problematic. I mean, the bigger question is, if there are no kernels running, should it launch the default kernels or not? And in your case, you certainly do not want that, because then it would take forever to launch 100 kernels for some stupid built-in function. But some other cases where you have just the default local kernels configured, then by all means launch them, and even after the computation, kill them. And
it's not that fast to launch local kernels.
Yeah, well, it's reasonably fast, I would say.
It's not. Yeah, it's not that.
Is it launching them sequentially, or is it launching them in parallel?
I mean, eventually, I mean, the commands are given sequentially, but they all have an ampersand at the end. So I mean, it's just as fast as the different link launch commands can work. So I mean, I'm just limited by what link launch gives me. So.
Right. I mean, maybe what we need is sort of two sets of $configured kernels. There's like the
yeah, I understand. It's the I'm doing it seriously and I mean to do it, and the I might just get used because I'm a utility kernel and I happen to be hanging around.
Yes, I mean, that's kind of what I suggested here at the end of that notebook, that when you have that $use parallel kernels, you can say, yes, use them only if running, don't use them. And you could maybe just also give the default configuration you want to use for that case. Where the simplest case is an integer, which means that many or up to that many local kernels. And of course, that could be extended. Why not to just allow any kernel configuration on the right-hand side to be used for that particular case? Why not?
Okay, who are the first clients for this? What functions could use this?
Right. So there are solve and reduce for certain types of CAD or piecewise processing have already an algorithm to do it, and I think that the default system option is use any existing running subkernels. I'd have to double check that. And right, it was on by default, and it caused some issues, so we turned it off. Right, so there has to be a good way. Right, there has to be a way to say don't auto magically use things, because
Is there any reason that for displaying in the front end some little flashy thing that says using 7 kernels now? In the notebook footer, for example.
So those functions that do automatically parallelize would give some feedback.
How?
Are you more interested in knowing what's going on in the current evaluation, or what is the state of launched kernels?
I think more kernels. The fact that deep inside some function that it didn't even write, that there's some weird, cylindrical algebraic decomposition happening, I don't care. But I want to know something launched 7 kernels.
Is there a standard place in the front in the notebook?
Well, it's so the obvious place to do this would be in the toolbar that we've been working on.
Yeah,
we have a spot in the toolbar which will give feedback about kernel states.
Yes,
Are you
by all means let me know, and I can put it there.
Yeah, we just have to figure out how graphically to integrate that information.
Okay. Well, so I mean, use parallel kernels. Automatically use parallel kernels is really the point. I mean, really, this is $automatic parallelize or something. Because that's what, I mean, but of course that isn't really right either, because I mean, every map could be parallelized in principle. How do you decide whether to parallelize a map?
No, but it's really intended for internal superfunctions. And so these functions should have an option which would let everybody know that they do support this kind of automatic parallelization. Well, no, we shouldn't call it automatic parallelization, because that's reserved for the parallelize function. Internal parallelization or something like that. I mean, at the moment, I think it's quite a mess. I mean, there are some method options that some functions have method options that allow you to say whether or not you want to parallelize, but we should really streamline
use internal parallelization.
Yes.
So the obvious analog to me is what we did with autocompilation. It may be more sophisticated than that, but I mean, we have a compiled option that works in many places.
Yeah, but what's the default? I don't think we have a $$ variable for the default.
So are there cases where we think it makes sense to by default auto launch new kernels? I mean, is it conceivable to consider that functions might have like a cost function, and if the cost is high enough, then we should start launching?
Yes. I think so. I mean, if it's a computation that we plainly know is going to take an hour, then people are going to be very happy if we launch kernels and it takes,
Yes,
5
but I mean,
minutes
the main
instead.
point is that if we have this dollar variable, then I can set it to 2, and then I will specifically allow.
Oh, but John is making a different point. There's a frontier here. That
Okay.
is, there's a certain cost. I mean, it's a standard sort of resource allocation issue. There's a certain cost to launching the kernels, right?
Yes.
But if we know we're going to be doing a big, crunchy, heavy lifting computation, we should launch them, right? So this is, I mean, the question
you could do, like, for example, a very quick analysis on the expression that you pass to simplify, and certain markers can up the cost.
Well, I mean, we could do look, it's a standard machine learning type thing. Estimate the cost of simplifying this expression. And I'm sure we can quite easily get some heuristics for doing that.
Right. So, for example, I have one heuristic that, again, I don't remember if it's CAD or if it's solve or both, but right, one heuristic is, the piecewise cases. If there are a bunch of orthogonal piecewise cases, then it can send...
And they're big, because if they're small, it's not worth the communication overhead.
Right.
Look, to me, this is like we've done with machine learning, like we've done with a lot of other things. There's a quintessential case where we should use heuristics, possibly machine learning generated heuristics, to answer the question: what is the startup cost? What is the likely time to run? And then decide what to do by default.
Yes, I mean, it's a two-step process. One is you give these functions the permission to use parallelism. The second one is for each function to decide whether it's worth to do it.
You're right. Yes, I agree with that. Except I would add, just because I haven't heard this point made in the last 5 minutes, that there has to be a way, even if the function has the intelligence, there must be an easy way to turn it off, because, say, you're on the server and you don't want and you're maximizing the number of master kernels as opposed to the number of subkernels or something.
Right.
Yes, I mean, that's what the dollar variable is for, right? I mean, you could turn it off.
Right. Yeah.
I'll be right back, guys. Just a second.
Auto compilation is controlled via system option, which frankly, I don't think the number of people who care about turning it on and off, justifies any more effort than this. This is something where I think we have to have a dollar variable.
Yes, I mean, I agree. I mean, it makes it more visible.
I guess another question is, does parallel evaluate currently do, and is there the infrastructure to know? I guess there must be a way to know of this is how many subkernel licenses are still available for this machine that we can launch.
I mean, that's part of the kernel launching, right? I mean, that's and it is only implemented for local kernels where it's easy to figure out what the license limits are. For remote kernels, you have to decide how many you want as a specific number. And so, I mean, if the machine is remote, I mean, it would have to SSH into it first, figure out how many there are, and so on. So that's not part of the current kernel launcher, but the new one might have something like that, where you can tell it to launch as many on a machine as is possible. At the moment, it needs to know how many there will be beforehand, because it waits for them to come back, and it needs to know when it can stop waiting.
Right, and this sounds like certainly like something where the default auto launch kernels, possibly all auto launch kernels, but should be local kernels, both in terms of just how much it costs to spin them up versus...
I don't think that's always true. I mean, look, I know, in my little farm of 100 kernels that I've been using recently, right, when I have a big computation to do, I really want all of them. I mean, it makes a big difference. Factor of 100 is a significant perceptual difference.
There's two ways to look at this. One is to say the default configured kernels is just using local kernels. So if you don't change anything, it will just use local kernels. But if you go to the trouble to define your own $configured kernels to include 100 remote kernels, then yes, then why not use them? I mean, but on the other hand, I might see a case where you would like to say, okay, I have these 100 kernels, but I don't want them to be spun up just because I do some solve that I didn't even realize I did. So I might use $use internal parallelization and set it to use only local kernels, for example. So there could be two kernel configurations, one for parallel tools and one for internal parallelization.
Right, which if you really wanted to, you could set the internal parallelization one to be your 100 distributed kernels.
Yes.
But
Fair
by
enough.
default, it would be a separate. You'd have to opt into that.
Yes.
Okay, question which comes out of a question from Ethan on the live stream. If a kernel is not, if you finished using it for an internal function, but you haven't closed it, does it have a high cost to keep it open? I mean, it's going to use some memory, some virtual memory, presumably.
Yes, I mean, it's a process that it's sleeping, so it doesn't cost anything, really. I mean, it has.
So in modern times, I mean, I've got all kinds of junk that's sleeping.
Yes, I mean, it has a TCP connection open. It has some memory, but that memory gets swapped out if it's not being used. I mean, typically your operating system has hundreds of sleeping processes.
Yeah, right. Didn't my thing run out of SSH slots in my parallelization thing?
That's quite possible. I mean, there are so many configuration options there, and just to make sure that the new kernel launch I'm working on will make a single SSH connection into one machine, even if there are 100 kernels to launch there.
Okay.
That problem will be solved.
Okay, so listen, with respect to this thing, use internal parallelization, seems to me, or $internal parallelization. Maybe it's the best thing, because that's saying this is going to specify what internal parallelization you are going to use. So I'm saying, so internal parallelization goes to none,
Yes, could say non-automatic, which would mean to use $config kernels.
Or some list of kernels.
Or a list of kernels to use.
Or some string name which does something special.
Yeah,
or
I mean, the
something.
easiest case is just an integer, meaning that many local kernels.
Right.
Well, I think. Well, I mean, I would think. Well, maybe this is a different value, but I would think we need a value which says use existing open kernels, right? I would think one don't do nothing. And I
mean, there are two cases. One is to say if none are running, launch the default kernels. The other is just use whatever is running, and if nothing is running, then just do it sequentially.
And there's even more stuff. I mean, there's stuff like, if you think, I mean, it could be some giant association of options here. I think this is the right name for it.
And we don't think internal is going to scare people off unnecessarily.
Well, maybe the right thing, given that it's in that function itself, would be use parallelization. It's a little weird with the dollar variable.
Yes.
We could call it, and maybe we rejected this earlier, but I was thinking, what's wrong with dollar automatic parallelization?
Because that is rejected because of the fact that there's much more parallelization we could do.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I understand that point.
Yeah, automatic parallelization is already used by the parallelizer functions.
For map and everything else. We're not going to do this in map.
Okay.
At least in the in the near future.
I mean, internal parallelization isn't bad, except that I mean, does it scare people?
Well, also within a particular function, it's kind of stupid to say internal parallelization because it's the function itself.
Parallelization.
Part of a method.
What about just parallelization and dollar parallelization?
It's a little weird because we've got parallelize.
Yeah, I mean, parallelization is okay, but dollar parallelization is not. because that's no longer inside that particular function.
Yeah, Brian on a live stream is suggesting a time to live for kernels. That is, if a kernel has not been used in a while, kill it off. I'm not sure how necessary that is. I mean, as people have pointed out, operating systems have tons of stuff running.
Yes, I mean, what is a valid point is that if that function actually launches kernels, it should probably close them at the end.
Well, so long as the cost to reopen isn't ridiculously high. I mean, yeah. Okay.
Well, but I mean, if you anticipate that, then you launch them once at the beginning, and then they will just be used from then on.
I see what you're saying. By the way, Mufi is pointing out that Kubernetes configuration is a useful reference for launching. I don't think, does anybody here know about that stuff? We certainly have people who know about that, but I don't think they're in this meeting. Anybody here know about the Kubernetes configuration for parallelization? Roman, do you know anything about it?
No, unfortunately not. No.
Maybe you should ask Aletra and those guys about it. Okay, okay, so on this, we don't completely know the name, but we've got a few candidates, but we can start actually thinking about doing it and start trying to understand these cost functions. Okay. All right, let's try and tackle this point because I think it's an important one. What on earth is this?
This is right. So the question is, should we have some sort of control equals like interface for resource functions,
or more to the point, which is what I support, should resource functions be in the autocomplete, in the generic autocomplete?
Well, that sounds really expensive. I don't think I would want autocomplete to have to wait for autocomplete to go to the website to get all the resource functions every time I start a front end.
Well, what we've talked about, although it would be some expense to build, but is to have a regularly updated packlet.
Yes, that's the right answer. Yeah.
We're already asynchronously bringing in the names for autocomplete within the resource function wrapper. And when the way it works is they're cached on disk from the previous time, and when the function resource packlet loads, by
the way, why on earth am I seeing that in the autocomplete there? Why am I seeing that?
That's Paco's packlet. I have nothing.
I don't care what it is.
I have nothing to do with it.
I understand. I'm not asking you. I'm asking John.
No, it's
because we don't because it needs to be added to the exclusion, right? If somebody,
I mean, we don't really have, as we discussed before, we don't really have a good system for maintaining or dealing with all these new contexts that pop up.
Right, and I mean, if you installed some user, so you're telling me that if I install some packlet from somebody out in the world, I shouldn't see that their context on the in the completion list?
Steven
No.
doesn't want to see contexts that are coming from internal to the product, except for the ones that are documented. But the problem is it is whack-a-mole on speed. So.
Is that internal to the product?
Yes. Well, maybe it isn't. Maybe no, it is. Oh. I didn't install anything.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah. So basically. Well.
Okay. So anyway, the whack-a-mole project should be continued. All right. Okay. Why isn't that auto-completing?
It only starts after the kernel packlet's already loaded. So do some resource function evaluation. Wait a moment and then do it again, and it'll autocomplete the second time. Right? The autocomplete is created within the kernel.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Right. So
But wait a second. In the 0 state there, it should say something.
Right. We want to each version have something that's built in using the normal autocomplete. We need to do that. And so then, you won't see things that have been published in the last month at 0 or 2 months at 0
Well,
state. But,
okay, that might be more confusing. Why not just have something that says loading autocomplete? And load it even the first time. In other words, when I first, rather than just being dumb as a stone the first time I do it, right, and bringing up nothing, bring up something that says loading autocomplete, and as soon as it's loaded, show the autocomplete.
Sure, I'm sure. John or someone could help me do that. I wouldn't know how to do that.
Is that useful?
Yes. Because I want to see the autocomplete. I don't want to be dumb as a
we're
stone.
getting your attention to telling you to tell you that we can't do anything for you yet. Keep typing as if we didn't get your attention.
Well, I might just wait for it to load. I might very well wait for it to load because I don't know what to type. And without that, I'm like, what do I do? Hello, what's going on?
I think if we're going to do that, it should.
Okay, you're
it
right.
Should know, it'll be annoying, and we should only do it if we know that the values that are available are older than months.
You know what? It's fine. Use the values from a month ago. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so this is being dynamically updated.
Right. So in one session, it downloads values, and then they become available in the next.
Right. So assume that the cost thing is taken care of. To my mind, auto-completing, including these things in the autocomplete, and when you select them, producing a function blob for them seems like a good solution. Now, there's a separate issue of, is there some other mechanism? I mean, I don't see the point of another mechanism. I think that mechanism is fine.
Yeah. Well, so here's one thing you might want to consider for resource functions that you've used before. You might want to show them fully in the autocomplete while you're still typing resource function. I mean, so resource function can complete to resource function, then you type in the square bracket and such, but it could also show completions to things you've typed in before fully.
Yeah, why not? That's a good idea. Oh, you mean in a state like this?
Yes. So you'd still see resource function, but if it ranks high enough, then you'd see, actual fully embodied resource functions which you previously used.
Yeah, why not?
And does it complete to the input form or to the blob?
Input.
I think we would both show and complete to the blob. I'm assuming the blob is visually descriptive enough that's going to be easy to figure out.
I think it's a little confusing here. You do this and you get the name of something that says, birds say, and it's like I typed RSEO. Why on earth did I get something about birds?
What does a blob look like again? Does a blob not say resource function somewhere?
It does not say resource function.
Oh.
Where's the bird? There's the bird, Rick's bird. I finally understood about the cockapoo and the whole origin of the bird say thing. I was much more taken with that once I knew.
Well, I don't think it's that big of a deal, particularly I think it's just a small bit of graphic design that can fix that. I mean, imagine resource function, and then say the 2 or 3 entries below resource function are just showing that slightly indented.
And you could add the little function repository logo next to the name, maybe.
Yeah, I just think in the UX here, it should segment off the resource functions, just so you know. The reason I'm seeing this stuff when I typed RES is because they're resource functions.
But keep in mind, it will only show it to you if you've actually typed it in before.
Fair enough. All right, it's probably okay. All right, so
under my proposal, at least.
Yeah, I don't disagree. What's this stuff here?
This was just a mock-up that I guess Richard created of a control equals like interface for resource function, but I don't think there's any I mean, if we're happy with the current autocomplete, I don't think there's really much point in.
It's auto-discoverable in autocomplete, which is nice. I mean, there is the interesting question of whether control equals could do this.
I think not.
All right.
Right. I mean, control equals accepts arbitrary syntax that it sends out to alpha, having it, now
right. There's too much overlap in namespace.
Having a pre-process step before it goes to alpha.
No, I'm not
suggesting. It's not going to work.
Right. There's too much overlap in namespace too, right? Do you want Jacobian to go to a resource function?
No, we can deal with that stuff, but I don't disagree that it's not particularly useful UX. Okay. All right. So I think we've got a plan there.
Okay, we can postpone this one to next time. It's given that we're already half hour over.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all very much. Thanks to folks on the live stream. See you all soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Yep.
Bye.